Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you, everyone. Once again, we apologize for the technical difficulties, but we'll get started now. We want to welcome you to the webinar as part of our continuing collaboration with the City of Las Cruces and kicking off the Brownfields efforts as part of the People Helping People through Brownfields Revitalization. And this is the second installment for partners, for staff, for stakeholders interested in the efforts going on in Las Cruces and beyond that for the Brownfields process more widely applied. So special thanks to the city, to our partners with the New Mexico Environment Department, to our partners with New Mexico Economic Development, and to our partners and the funding providers through the US EPA. So just wanted to start with a few ground rules. You will be muted. Please feel free to submit questions via the chat. Sherry Walsh with our team will monitor those, and we'll keep up to date on those. And please, when joining, please include your full name so we can have a record of that. And we will have a Q&A session, and that will allow you to identify yourself and provide any questions. We hope to have some meaningful dialogue toward the end. And again, minimize any distractions, and please mute yourself. So you should be able to see the ground rules, and for those that are connected by computer, you should see the following screen. And this is what the audio looks like. So hopefully everyone's seeing that correctly. And so at the today's agenda, we're going to have Lisa LaRocque with the City of Las Cruces tell us a little bit more about the vision and purpose and the goals for this kickoff. And then we will be transitioning to have Ali Furmall with the New Mexico Environment Department talk about the state programs and some of the resources available. Then we'll have Karen Peycke with EPA Region 6 tell us more about brownfields, some of the resources and tools available from EPA. Then we'll have Juan Torres with the New Mexico Economic Development Department talk about some of the incentives available. Oral Saulters will talk a little bit about the tools from K-Stabe tab and how we fit into the overall collaboration. And then we'll come back to Lisa, who will tell us a little bit about next steps, and we look forward to an in-person workshop there in Las Cruces that will be occurring on Tuesday, April 24th, and then we'll wrap things up. So thanks again. Lisa, would you want to talk a little bit more about the big picture purpose and goals?
Sure. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today on the webinar. We are interested in supporting all developers and interested professionals in the city with learning more about what brownfields are and how we can best utilize them. So we see lots of benefits for that, from preparing land for new commercial activities, from creating jobs and economic development, to increasing local tax bases and more livable communities. And I know today you'll find out more about what a great resource these folks are that are presenting to you, and about all the opportunities we have to improve our city and make new places welcoming for everyone. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the presenters.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Yeah, this effort is really part of an ongoing partnership. We were thinking about particular sites, both within Las Cruces and then more broadly throughout the region. And for those that are connecting from other places, please think about how this might apply to your community. So next up, we have Ali Furmall with the New Mexico Environment Department. She's going to set the stage for us with Brownfields 101. Thank you, Ali.
Thanks, Oral, and thank you, Sherry, for getting us started, and Lisa for the introduction. My name is Ali Furmall. I work with the New Mexico Environment Department's Brownfields program, and today I'm going to talk very briefly about what is a brownfield exactly, why should you be interested in redeveloping them, what are some of the drawbacks and what are the benefits, and a little bit about NMED services that can assist with that. Next slide, please. So brownfield has a definition from EPA. It is the real property, the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse of which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. So it can be almost any site that has a prior use. It can be an old gas station or an old motel or an old dump. It doesn't have to be a vacant parcel. It could be currently used but underutilized. It doesn't have to be the dirtiest, most environmentally contaminated site you may have ever found. And most importantly, it may not have any hazardous substances present. When you do the assessments, you may discover that the parcel is ready to redevelop as is. Next slide, please. And another click. So these are a few examples. This is the old train depot in Tucumcari. This was redeveloped into a museum, and it had asbestos-containing materials due to its age. And now it is a quite really nice parcel in Tucumcari. This is actually in the city of Las Cruces, over by Sierra Middle School. It's a vacant lot that the city acquired, I think, from DOT roadwork, and the city wanted to redevelop it, but they were concerned that it might have some issues. So NMED's contractor did a phase 1 environmental site assessment there and discovered that the parcel has never been used at all. What you see in front of you that looks kind of like a pit is really just a borrow pit where people have come to get clean fill over the years. This is the back of an old dry cleaner in Clayton. This dry cleaner was operational for many decades, and we found that nearly all dry cleaners have their operation has resulted in some lingering environmental impact. And this is in Albuquerque. This is an old property along the rail line there. The city of Albuquerque is hoping to redevelop into mixed use, living spaces, businesses. They are currently using one of the buildings on the property for a farmer's market, and the rest still require some assessment and remediation. So how do you address a brownfield when you identify them? First thing, identify them and create an inventory for your community. And the inventory is really unique to each community. In addition to identifying properties that are underutilized, you should think of other criteria by which you can categorize them, such as access to transportation, nearness to grocery stores, or other things that are important to your community that might help you decide how to prioritize those sites when it's time to assess and redevelop. Once you've identified them, you have to investigate them. You have to find out if contamination is actually present. A phase 1 environmental site assessment is something of a book report about a property where you do a historical review and learn about the property and the area around its prior use to see if any of those operations may have resulted in an impact. A phase 2 assessment follows that up with actual sampling to confirm or eliminate the belief of the presence of contaminants at the property. If you identify contaminations, the next step would be to clean them up to a level appropriate for your planned reuse. And once the property is ready for its planned reuse, you redevelop. At every phase of this, community involvement is absolutely critical. Having the buy-in of the community will carry a project forward through changes in local government and state government, and through changes in priority for the community. If you have the neighborhood involved, you'll have a successful project. So the benefits to redeveloping brownfields are many. First off, you address an environmental impact that was not being addressed. You have an opportunity to use existing infrastructure rather than building out new utilities outside of town. You remove blighted properties. That limits the development of green space and urban sprawl, which have many benefits, limiting unnecessary car traffic and keeping open spaces available for recreation and solitude. Brownfield redevelopment solicits community involvement and fosters ownership in the redevelopment and in the community. And they're showing that redeveloping brownfields they're starting to do research to tie that back into improvement in community health. And it's not just as simple as improving just health parameters. It's also improving a sense of community and a sense of community pride that leads to kind of far-reaching health benefits. So, of course, there are some drawbacks to redeveloping a property that may have environmental contamination. A property that has been used previously, may have some surprises for you. And that is why it is so critical to get good environmental site assessments before you acquire the property. Utilizing Brownfields funding has its own set of requirements. There are planning documents that are required. Davis-Bacon wage law typically applies. There are reporting requirements to the state and to EPA. And so there are additional burdens to the money. It sometimes takes a little extra work to entice developers to work on properties that have documented environmental contamination. Many developers will shy away from that, would prefer to work on a clean parcel. And, and there is potential liability with acquiring a property with environmental impacts. It is absolutely vital to conduct that phase 1 environmental site assessment, and it needs to be done within 180 days of taking title. That's prior to taking title. And it is really important to work with your state environment department about assessing potential environmental liability with the acquisition. So some important liability considerations. It varies by the state program that has oversight for that property. For property transactions at many tank sites that are like an old gas station, the liability for a release often stays with the owner of the property at that time. However, for many other programs that have impacts to groundwater or subsurface soils, the liability can transfer with the property. And that can transfer even if you've done a phase 1 environmental site assessment. The state does have ways to assist with that. And our voluntary remediation program is one of those ways. And I will only speak briefly about that today, but we'll talk about it a lot at the workshop. A prospective owner must have a current phase 1 environmental site assessment prior to taking title for voluntary acquisitions. I can't say this enough. This is the door to Brownfields funding. It is imperative. And again, the phase 1 we'll talk a little bit more about today, but a lot more about at the workshop. And then after acquisition, so you've done your phase 1 environmental site assessment, you've done all the due diligence that you need to, you still need to take appropriate measures to ensure that a release does not occur after you've acquired the property. And so for economic development and community revitalization, repurposing vacant or underutilized property increases property tax revenue in the area. So more revenue means more good work. Property values increase in the area around a redeveloped brownfield. That's beneficial to your neighbors. Community involvement results in redevelopment that addresses a community need. New businesses or expanded businesses create more jobs and in turn create more revenue. And you have more available goods and services or community spaces, particularly in your downtown areas, in areas that are already developed but are underutilized. Okay, so I've said phase 1 environmental site assessment a lot. Let me talk about it a little more. The purpose of it is to support landowner liability protections for the prospective property owner. The phase 1 environmental site assessment is required for accessing brownfield cleanup funding. And it satisfies EPA's all appropriate inquiries requirement, which is that the prospective owner do appropriate due diligence prior to acquiring the property, so that they can demonstrate that they are a purchaser that did not contribute to the contamination at the property. The phase 1 environmental site assessment is also used to help the buyer understand potential environmental issues that could be present at the property, so that the buyer be informed. And lenders typically require a phase 1 environmental site assessment to evaluate their own risk for their lending. So New Mexico Environment Department Voluntary Remediation and Brownfields Program has several components that can assist with brownfields assessment and redevelopment. We have a targeted brownfields assessment service where communities and nonprofits can request environmental site assessments from us. We prioritize them based on demonstrated community involvement and readiness, a good plan for redevelopment. We have a little bit of money every year where our contractors can do the assessments for you at no cost to the requester. We have a Brownfields Cleanup Revolving Loan Fund, where we provide low interest loans for cleanups at eligible brownfields. Our voluntary remediation program is a state-run program that provides oversight of investigation and cleanups. In this case, the person responsible for the contamination may also be eligible to participate in the voluntary remediation program, and the state offers a certificate of completion when work is done that transfers with title to the property, and includes a lender liability protection component that really helps with property transactions. We also offer technical assistance. You can call or email us at any time with any question about an environmental issue or a potential purchase, and we will be happy to assist in any way we can or put you in touch with the right people. We also do outreach. We do webinars and workshops all over the state. We will come speak at a meeting, or we'll be happy to to reach out and participate in any way we can. Excuse me. So some other assistance for brownfields, and these are our partners. They are on this call or on this webinar today as well. Kansas State University's Technical Assistance to Brownfields program. Oral will talk more about this, but they have a lot of great services that can assist you with preparing a brownfields inventory, preparing grant proposals, and a lot of other assistance to help you move through the process. EPA Region 6's Brownfields program also has some great services. It can provide brownfields assessments and redevelopment planning. And so just to summarize, we are happy to provide free technical assistance in addition to our other services. Please reach out to us if you have any questions. We are happy to help, and it's better to contact us early and often than after the fact and kind of limit the services we can provide.
Thank you so much, Allie. That was very informative. We really appreciate it, especially given you're a little bit under the weather, so you're a real trooper. Thank you so much. Yeah, next up we have Karen Peycke with EPA Region 6. Thank you, Karen.
A question on chat. Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Am I unmuted? Okay, cool. Good afternoon. My name is Karen Peycke. I'm with the Brownfields team at EPA Region 6, Environmental Protection Agency. We're going to do a little bit of an overview. We're going to probably repeat a little bit what Allie just covered, and then we're going to give you some examples. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're trying to go with the process, grants, technical assistance for brownfields. Next slide, please. I think Allie had covered about inventory, investigation, cleanup, and remediation, but we kind of put a little bit of a fancier twist on that same concept. Elements of brownfield revitalization. The bigger thing is the message we're trying to relay is, instead of looking at a brownfield, trying to find a brownfield property or site, and then come out for funding or assistance, having to drive it that way, we suggest that community folks look at it of what's your vision and use needs in your community. Determine those reuse visions and goals, and then go out and look at what would be impediments to that. That's when you identify brownfield properties. You can inventory them, and then when you inventory them and identify their impediments, you can prioritize them. What's the most important? What's holding up? What's the one that holds up your reuse vision or goal? So if the reuse vision and goal is affordable housing, are there lots of abandoned houses, or is there a whole area where it's been underutilized, a whole like neighborhood or block? That might be a great way to prioritize it. The environmental site assessment, Allie had mentioned that. Again, designing what your needs are based on your reuse visions. Certainly we want to encourage you to do a phase 1. If the phase 1 recommends a phase 2 where there's sampling that's done, okay, and a cleanup plan, okay, all right. Then leverage funding resources, because guess what? Even if you find you have a reuse vision and goal, and even if you've identified brownfields, and even if you have prioritized them and done assessments, you're going to have to find other resources, because brownfields resources at the state and EPA only address the environmental. It does not actually address demolition. It will not pay for construction. It will not pay for infrastructure improvement. So that's kind of a really big deal here. And then we hope that if there is assessment says there's cleanup needed, and you have a cleanup plan, that you clean up and then eventually revitalize. This all is driven locally. We provide tools, the assessment grants, revolving loan fund grants, but basically you're the one, you communities are the driver. You're in charge of your destiny. What do you want to have happen for your community? Next slide, please. So this is the wheel of funding as opposed to the wheel of fortune. The wheel of funding at EPA for brownfield assistance. The top 3 letters or circles, if you will, are competitive grants. The cleanup grants, assessment grants, and revolving loan fund grants. We do an annual competition in the fall for all 3 of these grant programs. Assessment grants, there's no match required. They are our most competitively sought after grants. Cleanup grants and revolving loan fund grants are have a match. It's 20%. A cleanup grant tops out at $200,000 with a 20% match, $40,000. The revolving loan fund grants normally top out around $600,000 to $1 million. It's a small cap program to actually finance cleanup on not just one property, but several properties. It can be capitalized. Again, it's a loan program, but there is the ability to do some sub-grants to eligible entities. This is a very powerful tool. And in the state of New Mexico, you're very fortunate because New Mexico Environment Department actually has a statewide revolving loan fund for brownfield cleanup. So this is a great tool. That means that you have an option as a New Mexico community. If you need cleanup, instead of having to come through the national competition and compete with everybody in Boston and San Francisco and Kansas City and Chicago for cleanup funding, you can go directly to Ali Furmall at the in New Mexico. It's an awesome tool. Okay, the 3 bottom ones of the what is the interest rate of a revolving loan? Oh, what a great question. What is the interest rate for revolving loan? That is up to the community to determine. So you can use market rate if that's the interest loan that your market will support. But let's say your market is maybe you have some economic distress, and so maybe you need to set it at below prime or prime interest. Maybe you can set it at 0 or 1% and give a longer payback schedule. That incentivizes that cleanup to happen and hopefully that redevelopment to happen. So anyway, going back to the funding chart, the wheel of funding, the area-wide planning grant is an actual grant to help you because we recognize some communities don't actually have a real rigorous planning department. That's a really expensive infrastructure or capacity, and most of our communities in our region do not have that. So what do? We provide this grant competitively. We didn't compete it this year. We hope to compete it next year to help you do a whole neighborhood or target area to plan. You can inventory with this. You can pay for brownfield inventory with this grant. You can do some planning. I call it master planning light. The targeted brownfield assessment, that's a service. Ali covered that. And then the job training grants, that's for us, again, it's another grant to promote local hire to get a skill set in environmental fields, like certification for abatement of asbestos and lead-based paint. Next slide, please. So we really want to stress about limiting your liability for past contamination on Superfund. That's what really drives this. That's where we kind of our original, that's where the brownfield program originated. So that's why we use that term Superfund. Next slide, please. But these are not Superfund sites. These are brownfield properties, voluntary. For the phase 1 environmental site assessment, the all appropriate inquiry rule or phase 1 environmental site assessment, we use that term interchangeably. The rule is basically the environmental due diligence that was created but way back as a result of amendment of Superfund in 2002 to give everybody a uniform slate of how to do environmental due diligence, the phase one. ASTM is an engineering group, and they actually come up with the kind of the recipe or directions on how to do that phase one, so that it is, again, meets certain parameters, i.e. they look at the same things. It's updated every, generally 7 years. The last time it was updated was 2013, December. The big change in 2013 was that all phase one environmental site assessments need to assess or evaluate if there is the potential for vapor migration or intrusion in or around the property. What is vapor intrusion or migration? That is when there might be invisible, we call it vapor, particulates or volatiles that come up, and maybe there's a contaminant that is bonded with groundwater, and it comes up through air pockets through the soil into structure. That was a new development, and not all sites are going to have that. An example of a potential for vapor intrusion would be a dry cleaner factory or plant. And if that dry cleaner plant operated when they were still using solvents like perchloroethylene or trichloroethylene, that actually could potentially been released, when they were handling, the delivery of that product to a dry cleaner, and let's say it went through the concrete slab or went to the soil and migrated down to the groundwater, chemically bonds with the groundwater, and then potentially creates vapor that would come up through the soil. That's a really long and kind of probably more details than anybody wanted, but that's a for example. Next slide, please. So going back to why are we doing this phase one or the all proper inquiry? It is to actually provide you some protection as a potential owner for past contamination that you neither contributed to or made a decision about. So when we say voluntary acquisition, we're talking about you're going to buy the property, you're going to accept the donation of a property, that you accept it. That's a voluntary action. Okay, and the phase one, okay, you see the stop sign lady? I hope everybody sees the stop sign lady. We want all of you, if you come away with nothing from this webinar, please come away with the information. Please go back to the next slide, please. I don't know why I went back, but we need to go to the next slide. Thank you. The stop sign lady actually it's a visual mnemonic. Please stop and consider before you acquire property. Please do your phase one. If you do your phase one and there is suspected or you confirm that there's contamination, you can still complete the transaction, acquire the property knowing it's contaminated, and be still not held liable for past contamination. You qualify as an owner classification that we call bona fide prospective purchaser. Okay, that's a very important deal. Let's say though that you did your phase one. Your phase one said there's no contamination detected or suspected, and you completed the transaction and you acquired the property. But after you acquired the property, you discovered that contamination was on the property. Let's say maybe there were barrels buried there, you didn't know that, or waste or whatever. So the question would be, you could 5 minutes. Okay, I'm almost out of time. So we're going to move on to the next slide, please. Next slide. Brownfield successes, because I got 5 minutes to do this, so it's going to be really fun. Helena Senior Living Center. This is a really great example of a small town in Arkansas. They had the need to provide senior living for their community. They looked at their high school and said, ugly, ugly, ugly. They came in for a cleanup grant. They won a cleanup grant from EPA. They did the abatement of asbestos. And, whiz bango, there they are. They developed it into a lovely 40-unit senior living center. Next slide, please. And I hope some of you guys recognize this. La Clínica de Familia has taken the old closed Memorial General Hospital. It used to be the City Hall for Las Cruces. Those are the pictures of what it looked like, black and white. The middle is the graffiti that was in there. And the last one is when it was City Hall. And now is the Cervantes Complex Central Medical Center, providing affordable health care in Las Cruces. Great success. New Mexico Environment Department provided the site assessment, and La Clinica was able to provide their finance. Next slide, please. On the same order of affordable health care, the New Orleans East Louisiana Health Clinic. In Louisiana, after Hurricane Katrina, the picture before is a post office. The U.S. Post Office abandoned it. They did not decide to return to that site location. And the local community development organization, Mary Queen of Vietnam, was very interested in acquiring the property. The grantee, City of New Orleans, provided a phase 1. Mary Queen of Vietnam was able to acquire it, and then they developed it into the health clinic. It's really great. They speak all kinds of different languages. They're expanding that. It's just gangbusters for affordable health care in New Orleans. Next slide, please. The Hotel Lexington Transitional Housing in Gallup, New Mexico. Before the historic Route 66 Hotel, Hotel Lexington. Nice picture of it. You know, it looks like it just does, you know, it's like a Route 66 hotel. It's an older version. So CARE 66, which is the Community Area Resource Enterprise, local nonprofit, saw potential here. They actually went through the Brownfield program, got an assessment, got some assistance from New Mexico's revolving loan fund program as a sub-grant to do some cleanup, and they turned it into this wonderful transitional housing. They've got art there. That's the actual common room with art in there and some nice comfy chairs and a couch. Next slide, please. The Hogan Hozo is the affordable apartments in Gallup, New Mexico, because Gallup still needed infill development downtown. The Quol and Puerco site, this is, if you'll see over to the left, that's Carl's TV. It used to be the Hotel Liberty. And then next to it was this big old empty lot, which you would see, you're seeing these trees and grass there. Well, it was impacted by a dry cleaner plant. And so again, CARE 66 was the nonprofit that worked with NMED. They were able to get a sub-grant from NMED's revolving loan fund to address vapor intrusion. They went forward. It took them a long time, but they were persistent, and they have now opened up the Hogan Hozon, which is a 45-unit family apartment complex. Next slide, please. We're going to pass that one. Move on to the next slide, please. This pocket park in Throckmorton, Texas. Throckmorton, the population, I don't know if you can see that, 900 people countywide. Old gas station, you can see the heavy earth mover doing demolition there. It was a brownfield cleanup grant. You can see the tanks in the far left corner. And then now they have built it out into this lovely little pocket park. You know, it doesn't need to be something elaborate or fancy. I've used that overhead with a little squiggly blue line. That's my real bad drawing online. I suck at drawing, by the way. But this is a great idea. You don't have to build anything fancy. A pocket park in a little small community. What a nice amenity. Nice slide, please. Next slide, please. The Texas Museum, Musicians Museum in Irving, Texas. Who doesn't have an old automotive business with all the warehousing and broken concrete and weeds? It just looks a mess. It's really blighted. And Irving, Texas said, you know what? We see something different. We need a musician's museum. And so they took this property, they did the assessment out there, they passed on the developer, and the developer had the vision to build it. It's beautiful. They've got a music, you know, like a performance stage. They've got all this public art with the new entrance. This is a great use. Next slide, please. For more information, certainly we're happy to talk to you guys. Looking forward to talking to you in person. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Karen. That was a great presentation. We really appreciate those wonderful examples. Yeah, so next up we have Juan Torres with the New Mexico Economic Development Department.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for having me here. So you've looked at the sites, you have assessed them, you've cleaned them up. Now what do you do? So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about different finance options for once the sites have been remediated, or if they've been remediated to the point where you can engage in activities. Next slide, please. And this is my contact information and my colleagues, Joanna Nelson and Crystal Clearwater. So feel free to contact us if you have any questions. Our information is also on our website, gonm.biz. Next slide, please. So really, in a nutshell, there's a lot of different options that are available for taking care of things, and you can access a lot of those things through our office. We manage the Lead a Capital Outlay program that can provide grants for projects that are creating jobs and expending in land, building, and infrastructure. We do for specific project specific. So if you had a project in an area that was moving forward, that would be a commercial project, we would be able to provide financial analysis. We've been able to help those projects kind of access capital through banks. And a brand new piece of equipment that we have now added to our arsenal is the credit enhancement program. So the Economic Development Department currently has a credit enhancement program, which is essentially a loan guarantee program. And we will be targeting loan guarantees in brownfield areas, economically distressed areas, as well as projects that involve targeted groups such as women, veterans, etc. And that will be a guarantee that could be as much as $250,000 of a project. So I look forward to speaking more about that when we talk in person. Some of the other services that we do in our team, we provide packaging for projects, as well as helping, as I mentioned, companies and projects access capital. Next slide, please. So really quickly, there's a number of state tax credits that are available for various entities. The high wage tax credit is one of the most sought after ones. It's a cash credit based on wages paid. So again, when you have a project that's up and running in the brownfields or anywhere else, and if they're paying in your area, I believe it's over $40,000 a year, then I believe they can access those credits. And again, I can talk in more detail in person. But there are a number of different, these options are based on trying to offset working capital and starting costs. More specific to your needs, I think industrial revenue bonds are areas that you can look at for potential funding to offset costs for projects, community development block grants, as well as IRB lights, which are basically industrial revenue bonds for only equipment, are available. New markets tax credits, we still have about $22 million in federal new markets tax credits. And those are very lucrative, especially in brownfield areas. They get additional points when being scored for those credits. EB5 regional investment centers are ways that foreign investors can pool their monies to gain a green card in the United States, and they pool their investments and they're invested through these regional centers. I think there are about 8 regional centers that can operate in New Mexico, and those are available as well. Next slide, please. So private activity bonds, I'm going to just briefly go over this. Basically, those are bonds that could be issued through the State Investment Council that could be provided for a number of different uses. We generally do not, in New Mexico, do tax-free private activity bonds. We generally do only taxable private activity bonds, and that is a mechanism, another mechanism through which funding can be provided for financing major projects. The program is facilitated through the State Investment Council, which is also, they're the ones that provide the funding. The Board of Finances sets the parameters. It's also the same entity that does the TIDs and bids. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the Board of Finance, they minister the programs. They set the size and scope of the available private activities. Right now, last time I checked, it's at $306 million that's available for these sorts of things. And it's across the state for a number of different activities, including housing. I think next slide will explain a little bit more detail about housing and other options for private activity bonds. Next slide, please. So under that $306 million cap, if you will, the areas that could be accessed are housing, and that's primarily the largest chunk. So there'll be a lot of housing bonds sold for low-income housing, and then under the economic development, there's what's known as small issue facility bonds, which caps off the projects at $10 million and also has a lifetime, maximum of about $40 million. These are for economic development projects, and I've been involved with the State Investment Council for a while. These are pretty tough to get. They have a pretty high hurdle, and they're pretty much limited to manufacturing operations, even though they say they might take other things into consideration. Manufacturing, if it's not a straight manufacturing, then it's going to be a tough haul to go for a private activity bond. Next slide, please. So new markets tax credits. In a nutshell, new markets tax credits are federal tax credits that are made available in qualified census tracts. And qualified also includes, again, brownfields are one of the targeted areas. So the credits are available to investors. They basically make, for an investment of, let's say, $10 million, would be about 40% of that. It would be discounted to so basically, at the heart of the whole matter is there is a credit. The credit is sold on the open market. There are investors out there buying that credit. The discounted value of the proceeds from the sale of that credit can be used in a project and generally falls into the 20–25% of the total equity needed. The investors that buy these, they take those credits over 7 years, 5% in the first 3 years and 6% in the remaining years. There's a number of different activities that are not allowed. The massage parlors, golf courses, those are all federally designated so-called sin businesses. But generally speaking, any other type of business that's not that sort of business these credits are available for. I note that in the group chat, somebody brought up the Treasury program opportunity zones. And so this is probably a good place to talk about opportunity zones really quickly because they kind of mirror new market tax credits. So I mentioned that a project has to be in a qualified census tract. So you can go, there's a tool you can go to, and I don't know that I have it in these slides, but I can send that out on the New Mexico Finance Authority website. You can punch in an address and it will tell you if that address is in a qualified census tract. And that's for the new markets tax credit. So opportunity zones, and this is very timely, we just got off a phone call with the White House yesterday afternoon, as well as the Department of the Treasury. Opportunity zones are a new thing that were added into the tax cut bill that recently got passed at the federal level. They mirror new markets tax credit qualified census tracts. And what the program entails, at this point, we're kind of working through it, but the qualified census tracts within a state, the governor will be able to apportion up to 25% of those qualified census tracts. And again, when I say qualified, I mean they are qualified for new markets tax credit. That governor will be able to appoint about 25% of those qualified census tracts as so-called opportunity zones. And these opportunity zones will be locked in for 10 years. And they will be incentivizing investors to come and basically take unrealized capital gains in other areas and invest those into these opportunity zones. So right now, in fact, literally tomorrow, we will be meeting in our office. We've been tasked to make our recommendations to the governor on which 25% of those zones will be designated. So we're going to make we're kind of breaking it down. There are 249 qualified census tracts in New Mexico. So that basically means that the governor gets to pick 63 of those tracts as opportunity zones. And like I said, it's going to be quite an interesting thing. There are a number in your areas. So we're taking, once we have a set of data that we're working on tomorrow, we will be sending out to the counties a request to prioritize qualified census tracts in your community. So, so look for that. It's going to be through the county. So the city will have to work with the county. That's going to be on our website. We're going to put a way to upload those prioritized census tracts, but we will give all communities an opportunity to give their feedback on the qualified census tract to their communities. I know it's quite a diversion from my original presentation, but this is literally a last-minute federal program that's kind of coming together. So look for specific communications from our office very soon on this process as we go forward. Next slide, please. LEDA, most people would be familiar with the LEDA program. It's the Local Economic Development Act. In this last legislative session, we had a reinfusion of LEDA. The legislature provided $5 million in additional funding. And so our fund stands at roughly close to $50 million. So those funds are available to help projects in the areas of land, building, and infrastructure. And again, I think I'll be able to speak in more detail about LEDA opportunities when we meet in person, and hopefully we'll have a lot more information on the opportunity zone. So I'm taking it that it's Oral's turn, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Juan. We really appreciate that. That was very intriguing. And now that we've heard an overview from Ali, and we saw some great examples from Karen, and Juan has given us some good food for thought thinking about financing and opportunity zones. What's the next step? How do you get started? And that's where KSU-TAB can help. Next slide, please. So we're a network of technical service providers, scientists, engineers, architects, landscape architects, economic development specialists, planners that are free and available to help local governments. So we're here to help you. We work very closely with our partners, with EPA, with NMED, with economic development departments to try to provide the services that you need to create a vision, assess those brownfield sites that we've been talking about, and really come up with a roadmap, a strategy to transform those sites. We work mainly throughout the center of the United States, but we also do work closely with partners on both coasts. Next slide, please. This is just an example, litany of some of the things that we can provide. We kind of help you navigate that whole continuum, again, in conjunction with our partners and collaborators. We do workshops and webinars. Again, I want to plug the Tuesday, April 24th on-site workshop that will be taking place in Las Cruces. You'll hear a lot more with the speakers on this call, and then also other resource providers. So that's a great opportunity to learn more and advance the knowledge that we're just touching on today. But with respect to KSU-TAB, we can help you, you know, whether you're in the early stages of developing inventory and creating that vision, or you're actually ready to perhaps compete for one of the EPA grants. We can help you with that. We have a couple of tools that I'll talk a little bit more about later that really help you put together a successful competitive proposal. And really, Brownfields relies very heavily on those local engines, on local government, municipalities, counties. We work very closely with councils of governments. And really, it's up to the local government to decide how aggressive they want to be, from doing something that's just more supportive and behind the scenes to something that is very, very assertive in driving those projects forward. And we've talked, next slide please, a little bit about the process. We've heard from Ali and Karen, and you'll hear more about that during the on-site workshop. But we can help you with each stage of that process as well. Next slide, please. And one of the keys is really developing a strategic vision. And this is just an example of some images from Acoma Pueblo that we were helping them with. They had an old day school that they were interested in transforming. And so we were able to facilitate discussion, dialogue, go out to the schools, work with youth, and also to the senior centers and work with elders, work with local leaders, and really facilitate dialogue on what they want to see that site be in the future. And that's a great starting place to then begin understanding then what do we need to get there? How do we bring this to fruition? How do we get it assessed, cleaned up, and then financed as well? So just an example of how that all works. And of course, these projects are multidimensional. It starts with an environmental challenge, but there's so much more than that. Thinking about jobs, thinking about, just overall quality of life. And these are just some of the spheres that intersect as part of the redevelopment process. Next slide, please. And in addition to working closely with local governments and various departments, it's really important to get those local stakeholders involved. And we do that through a variety of fora. We can do that through sharing information, but also we want to have that kind of active, authentic involvement of the communities. And so we want you to think creatively about how to get the public involved. And these are just some examples from a community we're working with in Missouri. Next slide, please. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about a couple of tools that we have. They're free, they're available online. Simply by registering for this webinar, you should have access to those. One is a grant writing tool, Tab Easy, and the other is the Brownfields inventory tool. And that's a really good opportunity to compile information, organize your workflow, and have this kind of electronic file cabinet for putting all that information together and creating an effective Brownfields program. Next slide, please. This is just an example. This is the homepage for the bid tool, and it shows you that it's pretty straightforward. We have the icons there and some of the capabilities that it provides. Again, really building an inventory, identifying which sites will be a priority, connecting that with other initiatives in your community is so important. And then allows you to track where that particular site is through the process and connect that with funding, with technical information that might be a result of your phase 1s and phase 2s toward cleanup and redevelopment. And then we also have an interface with the EPA Acres database. And this is the database that's used to report on how effective the program is. Congress uses that information to decide on funding levels and really gauge success. So really, it's a very comprehensive and effective tool that I encourage you to explore. Next slide, please. And this is an example of within the Brownfields inventory tool of the way you can construct a program. It's really up to you. You can base that program on particular, if you have a corridor or if you have a downtown or a district that you're working on that you want to inventory a series of sites, or if you just want to create kind of a simple placeholder with a one Brownfields program, you can do it that way. And we encourage you to just use that information and begin to populate that information as data become available. And you can actually import data into the bid tool from other sources, and you can also export it for other uses, such as for a website, or if you're working on something else in a GIS system that you want to use that information for to leverage into a proposal. It's a great way to do that. Next slide, please. And this is an example of how you can actually, based on what you put in there, if you want to search and prioritize on a certain criteria, because as part of that vision, it's really important for a community to decide what are these organizing principles that are important to us. And you guys at the community level are the drivers for that, and you can use the tool to help you identify those particular sites and move forward through the process. Next slide, please. And this is just a summary slide of the tool itself. It's easy to get registered, to establish your program, to input that data, and then continue to add funding information and connect that with other sources of funding. You can bring in photos, other documents, summary reports, and then use that data, to really build an effective strategy that allows you to do so many different things, including activity log. Next slide, please. And this is the Tab Easy grant writing tool. Every year, EPA comes out with guidelines for the annual contest. And so what we do is we update the criteria based on those guidelines. And we have information, we have examples from the past that were successful. The tool walks you through every single step of that process, make sure you're not missing anything. It allows collaboration if you're working with others to develop those proposals. So this is another, if you're thinking about moving forward with the assessment, revolving loan, or cleanup grant process, this is a great tool. It doesn't address the RLF process, but for assessment and cleanup, we have everything contained within the Tab Easy tool. Next slide, please. Again, I mentioned the past successful proposals. And then also a lot of these things are data driven. As Juan mentioned earlier when thinking about the opportunity zones, you know, really understanding communities and the need and telling that effective story. Tab Easy can help you do that through the statistics and demographic data there. And it's really easy to use Tab Easy. If you have questions, please contact us, but it kind of walks you through that process and has a series of templates. Next slide. This is just some of the, you know, just the overall key reasons and the feedback that we've received from stakeholders and users on why they use BID and the Tab Easy tool. And, you know, again, I encourage you to explore that if you haven't. If you have any questions, clarifications, please let us know. And it really can help complement and make a meaningful Brownfields program. So in terms of overall, next slide, please. Our assistants were easy to work with. Just give us a call or send us an email, and we can help you through all those steps of the process. And last slide is our contact information. Please feel free to contact myself or Blaise Levin, who's our program coordinator. So thank you, everyone, you know, for being a part of this. Hopefully you feel like you've learned something, you feel inspired, and you really are ready to go for the next step, which will be the workshop April 24th, and there'll be a lot more information, and we'll have opportunities to visit further and talk about, you know, your particular sites or other opportunities or ideas in your community. We'd like to open it up to questions now. And also, I wanted to bring it back to Lisa, who's going to talk a little bit more about those next steps. Sherry, did you want to maybe moderate any questions that are coming in?
Yeah, sorry, we were having some mute issues. We've had a number of questions that have come through on chat and been answered. We will publish these to the webpage when we put up the recording of this webinar, so as not to take up too much time. If anybody does have any questions now, feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand and I'll unmute you, and you can do that at this time.
Hi, this is Lisa LaRocque. I just wanted to compliment all of you on the great job you did. I have already had my first experience having to take on a challenge with an abandoned meth lab house, and have found all of these folks to be incredible resources and have given me all sorts of ideas about how we can tackle that. I'm not afraid to do this, but what is the message that you would want to tell everyone about why it's really worthwhile pursuing brownfield remediation?
Hi, Lisa, this is Allie. That's an excellent question. And so I was just going to leap in and say my piece, if that's all right. You know, for me, the importance is multifold. It's to preserve green space, to improve public health, and to, you know, foster economic development and revitalization so that people love the places that they live. And that kind of sums it up for me.
Hi, this is Juan. So one of the things from the economic development standpoint is that we have very valuable assets that are just sitting on the sidelines. And I think a very good example, and Karen didn't have the picture this time, but she has brought it in the past. For those of you that have been to the Santa Fe rail yard, and if you've seen the rail yard before it was fixed up, there was some brownfield activity there, and it was remediated. You know, at the time, there was a lot of conversation about why do this and the expense and all that. But you fast forward to now and you see what a vibrant, commercially viable part of the downtown that has become. You realize, oh my God, why didn't we do this sooner? So from my perspective, it's really about community assets that are blighted, that are unseen, that are unsightly, and that become real important economic drivers for the region. I can point to Santa Fe University of Art and Design. They have a brownfield site on their campus, and as they go forward with the redevelopment of that overall location, they're going to have to take that into consideration. I note that on Karen's slide, she mentioned La Familia, and another resource that they use. I happen to work with the New Mexico Finance Authority. They use the New Mexico Finance Authority's behavioral health and health type, primary care capital fund, behavior health capital fund, child care revolving loan fund. They access, the La Familia access those funds. I think they got about $100,000. So there are other resources. Again, in the case of the New Mexico Finance Authority, it requires a set of funds that are dedicated to the loans, usually through a GRT, a portion of GRT. But there are ways to fund these sorts of activities that might not seem obvious. So there we are.
Thank you. Both those are great reasons. And one of the things that comes to mind for me is when we've looked at all the different visioning activities and blueprints that we've done for the city, I think about all of the opportunities and the special characteristics of places like Amador Proximo that has the great old gin mill and some of the outbuildings that are just ripe for some creative mind to transform that into a real asset for the city. And again, knowing that the wealth of knowledge that comes from all of you that are helping with this process, it makes it really exciting about how we can transform, especially the infill center city, into that vibrant area that we're all striving to do. So great inspiration there. Well, it seemed,
We will be sending out invitations for the workshop. The workshop is free, just like the webinar, and I didn't see it in the tab presentation, but all tab services are free. Questions, visioning, site visits, workshops. It's all provided free to the communities.
so we will have a recording of this webinar so you can share it with your colleagues so they'll be prepared. I think it's good to hear this a couple times. Each time I've heard the webinar, I've learned more, and I look forward to the workshop. And I hope that it will spur all sorts of things like the inventory and really plugging that into how we can foster the vision that we have for the community and how we can use a whole host of financing mechanisms for that. So all of those things will be covered on the on the day of the workshop, and things that you would really like to have highlighted, please share them with me, and I will feed them to the group that's going to be putting together this workshop so it's really meets your needs.
Okay, I believe Karen Peycke had some something she wanted to share.
Well, I was just going to say to everyone that we are looking for you guys to be successful. We can actually be very creative in problem solving to get you started. So don't feel like you have to conquer the world by yourself. We have so many tools that we want to be able to creatively apply towards whatever your challenges are. So KSU has the visioning planning, I think Oral said that, the BIT tool, Brownfield inventory tool, and we have the target brownfield assessment. We sit down and collaborate with Juan and with Ali many times. We'll look and bring in other federal partners like HUD, like Economic Development Administration, like Department of Transportation. So please, we would love to, the first step is you reaching out to us. I can't stress that enough. We'd love to work with you.
Okay, doesn't look like we have any additional questions. Oral, did you have anything final to share?
And you're muted, Oral.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I just wanted to especially thank our presenters, our speakers, our moderators, and all of you for participating. And we look forward to seeing you on Tuesday, April 24th there in Las Cruces. So thank you so much, and we look forward to talking to you soon. So I think that concludes our webinar. Thank you, and goodbye.